Atlanta is famous for rising from the ashes, but some say parts of its past never left. Across the city, visitors have heard dead soldiers answer a roll call in Oakland Cemetery. Hotel guests have woken to the smell of smoke from a fire that killed 119 people, and theater elevators have carried passengers to floors they never selected. But why do so many of Atlanta's most famous buildings seem to repeat the moments they were meant to leave behind? Oakland Cemetery is one of the most haunted places in Atlanta, and its best-known reports begin among the Civil War graves. Visitors have claimed they heard a man calling soldiers' names across the burial ground, followed by faint voices answering from different parts of the cemetery. Others have reported footsteps moving behind them, figures in old military uniforms passing between the headstones, and women in mourning clothes disappearing along the paths. But if no one living was among the graves, who was answering that roll call? The cemetery holds thousands of soldiers from the Civil War, including many whose identities were never confirmed. That history is important because the reported voices are often heard near the military section, where witnesses describe the sound of an officer conducting a formal roll call. A name is called, then a quieter voice answers from somewhere among the graves. The voices do not seem to come from one place. One response may sound close, while the next appears farther away, as though the men are standing in separate rows across the burial ground. Witnesses who have tried to locate the source have found no group, no ceremony, and no one hiding among the monuments. Some versions of the story say the roll call is heard during November, around the anniversary of Union forces leaving Atlanta. That timing belongs more to local legend than proven history, but the story has remained attached to Oakland for years. The idea of unidentified soldiers answering their names has become one of the cemetery's most unsettling traditions. The military section is also linked to sightings of figures dressed in Civil War uniforms. Visitors have described men walking slowly between the graves near sunset, sometimes appearing clearly enough to be mistaken for other people. The figure then passes behind a monument or tree and fails to appear on the other side. Other visitors have heard footsteps following them along the paths. The steps continue while they walk, stop when they pause, and begin again when they move. When they turn around, the path behind them is empty. Women dressed in dark mourning clothes have also been reported among the older graves. Some accounts describe a woman in black standing beside a family plot, her head lowered as though she is grieving. Witnesses, who look away for only a moment, find that she has disappeared. Another apparition is usually described as a pale woman in white. She has reportedly been seen moving through the cemetery near dusk, sometimes accompanied by a sudden cold draft or the scent of flowers. No single identity has ever been firmly attached to her, and the stories vary depending on who tells them. Near the cemetery entrance sits one of Oakland's stranger memorials. A life-size statue of businessman Jasper Newton Smith watches from above his mausoleum. Smith had a lifelong fear of neckties after a childhood accident, and he made sure his statue wore nothing around its neck. The statue became part of local folklore because visitors claimed it seemed to watch people entering and leaving the cemetery. A few stories even say the seated figure has appeared to change position after dark. Whether anyone truly saw it move is impossible to know, but the realistic statue has unsettled visitors for generations. Jack Smith's memorial is unusual, but the voices among the graves are what gave Oakland its haunted reputation. Soldiers are said to answer a roll call no living officer is conducting. Footsteps follow visitors along empty paths, and figures appear briefly before vanishing among the monuments. Oakland may be peaceful during the day, but according to those who have heard those voices after dark, the cemetery is not always silent. The Ellis Hotel stands on Peachtree Street in downtown Atlanta, but in 1946 it was known as the Winecoff Hotel. During one horrific night, 119 people died inside the building in the deadliest hotel fire in American history. Guests staying there today have reported waking to the smell of smoke, hearing people running through empty corridors and listening to screams when no one else is there. Are these stories created by the tragedy, or is the panic of that night still repeating itself inside the hotel? The fire began during the early hours of December 7th, 1946, while most guests were asleep. The Winecoff had been advertised as absolutely fireproof, yet it had no sprinklers, no external fire escapes, and only one main staircase serving the guest floors. Once flames and smoke reached that open stairway, the only route out was quickly cut off. People trapped above the fire tied bedsheets together, called from windows, and waited for ladders that could not reach the upper floors. Some jumped in an attempt to escape the heat. By the time the fire was brought under control, 119 people were dead, including teenagers visiting Atlanta for a youth assembly, and the hotel's original owner, William Winecoff, along with his wife, Grace. The building survived and eventually reopened as the Ellis Hotel, yet according to guests and workers, some part of that night may have remained behind. One of the most common reports is the sudden smell of smoke. Guests have described waking in the darkness, convinced something is burning nearby. They check the room, open the door, and search the corridor, but there is no fire and no clear source for the smell. Others have heard hurried footsteps moving along the hallways late at night. The sound is sometimes described as several people running together, as though a crowd is trying to escape. When doors are opened, or staff members investigate, the corridor is empty. There have also been reports of screams coming from the upper floors. Some witnesses describe one distant cry. Others claim they heard several voices at once, followed by an abrupt silence. The sounds are often compared with the panic that filled the building as guests realized the staircase was blocked and the fire was moving upward. The hotel's alarms have also become part of its haunted reputation. Local stories claim they have been activated around the time the original fire is believed to have started, despite no smoke or flames being found. Elevators are said to move on their own, and some workers have reported hearing voices or footsteps in rooms and corridors that were supposed to be empty. Another story involves a young girl known as Sarah. Guests have claimed to hear a child laughing or playing in the hallway, while others describe feeling a small hand tug at their clothing. No reliable record clearly identifies Sarah as one of the victims, so the name may have entered the story later. Even so, reports of a childlike presence remain part of the Ellis Hotel's folklore. The cause of the Winecoff fire was never firmly established. Investigators believed it started near the third floor, possibly involving a mattress or bedding left in a corridor. Careless smoking has often been suggested, but another darker theory has remained attached to the disaster. According to that story, a late-night poker game was taking place inside the hotel. A criminal known as the Candy Kid had supposedly been cheated by one of the players and wanted revenge. He allegedly set fire to a mattress outside the room, intending to trap his target inside. The intended victim escaped, but the fire spread through the hotel. There is no solid evidence proving the Candy Kid started the blaze, and the story appears mainly in later retellings. It remains a disputed theory rather than an established fact. What is known is that the fire began close to the third floor, spread rapidly and trapped people above it. That may be why so many modern reports follow the same pattern. The smell of smoke, running footsteps, alarms and screams all reflect the final moments of those caught inside the Winecoff. These are not stories of a quiet figure wandering through an old hotel. They are stories of people still trying to escape. Today, the building is renovated, modern and protected by safety systems that did not exist in 1946. But according to those who have woken to smoke that was not there, or heard a crowd running through an empty corridor, the Winecoff fire may not be entirely over. Atlanta's Fox Theatre is famous for its grand auditorium and star-filled ceiling, but some of its strangest stories come from the areas audiences rarely see. Staff have reported an elevator carrying passengers to the fourth floor, even when they selected somewhere else, heavy doors slamming inside the old boiler room, and music coming from the Mighty Mo organ when no one is sitting at its keys. Why does so much of the activity seem connected to people who once worked behind the scenes? The Fox opened in 1929 and quickly became one of Atlanta's best-known theaters. Behind the decorated walls are backstage corridors, dressing rooms, machinery spaces, and parts of the building that feel very different once the audience has gone. It is within those quieter areas that most of the theater's ghost stories are told. One of the best known involves the backstage elevator. According to theater legend, a manager once lived in an apartment on the 4th floor with his girlfriend. She later died inside the building, although reliable versions of the story do not agree on her name, the circumstances of her death, or even the exact date. Since then, actors and employees have claimed the elevator sometimes behaves as though it remembers where she lived. A passenger may press a button for another level, only for the lift to ignore the request and travel directly to the 4th floor. The doors open, but no one is waiting outside. Some riders have reported feeling a sudden drop in temperature as the elevator rises. Others describe the sensation of someone standing close behind them or touching their shoulder, even though they entered alone. The doors then close, leaving them to decide whether the lift simply malfunctioned or whether something called it back to the same floor again. Far below the auditorium is another part of the theater associated with a former worker known as Roosevelt. He reportedly worked around the coal furnaces that once heated the enormous building, spending much of his time in the basement while performances continued several floors above. Roosevelt's story has become one of the central legends told during the Fox Theatre's seasonal ghost tours. Visitors are taken into the old coal and boiler areas, where his presence is said to remain close to the equipment he once maintained. The theatre's dressing rooms have their own stories. Performers have claimed that makeup, brushes, and small costume pieces have been moved after being placed on a table. An actor may leave the room briefly and return to find an object somewhere they are certain that did not put it. One dressing room is often linked to a female presence. Local versions identify her differently, and some attach the name Anna Reagan to the story, claiming that her family once owned a home on the land before the theatre was built. The exact history behind that name is difficult to confirm, so it is safer to treat her identity as part of Fox Theatre folklore. The backstage area is also associated with the sound of heavy footsteps moving across the stage after the building has emptied. Someone standing near the curtain may hear steps approaching from the opposite side, but when they look, no performer or crew member is there. Shadowy figures have also been reported among the empty seats. They are usually seen briefly from the stage, where a dark shape appears to be sitting or moving through one of the rows. Once the house lights come up, every seat is empty. The theatre traditionally leaves a ghost light burning on the stage when the rest of the building is dark. There is a practical reason for it. The single bulb helps prevent someone from walking into the orchestra pit or tripping over scenery. But theatres have long carried another explanation. The light gives resident spirits a stage on which to perform after everyone living has gone home. The Mighty Mo is a huge Muller pipe organ built for the Fox in 1929. With more than 3,600 pipes and effects capable of imitating much of an orchestra, it was designed to accompany films and fill the auditorium with sound. It remains one of the theatre's most recognizable features. The haunting is linked to Bob Van Camp, a longtime organist who developed a close association with the instrument. Local accounts claim that after his death, some of his ashes were placed above or near the organ chambers. When the audience leaves and the main lights are lowered, the Fox Theatre does not become completely still. An elevator may begin moving towards the 4th floor, a metal door may close below the stage, and somewhere inside the dark auditorium, Mighty Mo may sound another note. Rhodes Hall is often called the castle on Peachtree, but its most unsettling reports have little to do with how the building looks from outside. Visitors have heard a cane tapping slowly along an empty staircase, seen the figure of an elderly man moving through the house, and reported a dark presence watching from the basement. Are these separate stories, or is something inside Rhodes Hall still trying to keep strangers away? The Granite Mansion was completed in 1904 for furniture businessman Amos Rhodes and his wife Amanda, They called the house Le Rave, meaning the dream, and lived there until Amanda died in 1927, and Amos followed the next year. The building later became the Georgia State Archives and is now preserved as a historic house museum. Most of the reported activity is connected with the quieter areas of the house, particularly its staircases and upper floors. Visitors and staff have described hearing footsteps moving through the building when no one else should be nearby. The steps are usually slow and heavy, as though someone is taking their time rather than simply passing through. In some accounts, another sound accompanies them. A wooden cane can be heard striking each stair. The presence does not always seem welcoming. Some visitors have described feeling watched from the moment they enter certain rooms. Others report a sudden wave of anger or the clear impression that they are intruding in someone else's home. One story tells of a guide preparing to leave after an evening tour when footsteps began moving along the rear staircase. The sound was followed by the tapping of a cane and what appeared to be the figure of an older man near the wall. Later versions add an angry voice ordering the guide to leave, though the account has been repeated through paranormal websites and should be treated as local folklore rather than verified history. Not all the reported activity seems hostile. Children's voices and laughter have also been heard inside Rhodes Hall, particularly around the staircase and upper rooms. Visitors have described catching sight of a young girl in a light-coloured dress, only for her to disappear before they can see where she went. Lights are also said to behave strangely. Bulbs flicker, dim, or switch off, even when there is no obvious electrical fault. That detail has become closely linked with Amanda Rhodes, because the house was unusually modern when it was built, with more than 300 electric lights at a time, when many Atlanta homes still relied heavily on gas or candles. The most troubling reports, however, come from beneath the main floors. Rhodes Hall's basement is now included in special tours focused on the building's legends, and the Georgia Trust describes it as one of the areas where the most paranormal activity has been reported. People entering the basement have described an immediate change in atmosphere. The space feels colder and heavier than the rooms above, and some visitors develop a strong desire to leave before anything unusual has happened. A dark figure is said to appear near the walls or in the corners of the basement apartment. It is usually described as a solid shadow with the outline of a person, but no visible face or clothing. Unlike the brief shapes sometimes seen upstairs, this figure is said to remain still, watching whoever has entered. Doors have also been heard closing in empty sections of the house, and investigators have claimed to record voices that were not heard at the time. Rhodes Hall has appeared on paranormal programs, but recordings and personal experiences have never provided a definite answer to what may be happening inside. Is it possible the Rhodes family never entirely left the house they called their dream? But if the angry presence on the stairs and the figure below belong to different spirits, Rhodes Hall may be holding more than one part of its past behind its granite walls. For 27 years, Atlanta's Masquerade operated inside an old industrial mill where concertgoers packed into rooms called Heaven, Purgatory, and Hell. Long after the machinery had stopped, staff reported footsteps crossing empty floors, screams near the rear staircase, and equipment moving when no one was close enough to touch it. Were these simply the sounds of an aging building, or had something from the mill's dangerous past remained inside? Local histories connect the mill with workplace accidents, a serious fire, and outbreaks of tuberculosis among its employees. A more recent investigation into the venue's history reported that workers were injured during production, and that at least one man was killed by the mill's belt system. When the building became the Masquerade, most visitors were there for the music rather than its industrial history. The different levels were divided into 3 performance spaces. Heaven occupied an upper section, Hell was below, and Purgatory served as the area between them. The names suited the rough, cavernous building so well that the club quickly became one of Atlanta's best-known alternative music venues. But employees working after the crowds had left began reporting that the old mill did not always become quiet. Footsteps were heard crossing upper floors when those areas were supposed to be empty. Staff would hear someone moving above them and assume that a colleague was still cleaning or checking equipment. When they went upstairs, no one was there. The sounds were often described as firm and steady, rather than the creaks of timber settling. They crossed part of the room, stopped for a moment, and then continued, almost as though someone was following a familiar route through the building. Cold areas were also reported inside the former mill. A member of staff might pass through a corridor or stand near one of the staircases and feel the temperature suddenly drop. These patches of cold did not always remain in one place. They seemed to appear briefly and then disappear, leaving the surrounding room feeling normal again. One of the most disturbing reports involved screams heard near the back of a staircase. Employees described a woman's cry coming from an area where no one could be found. It was loud enough to make people stop what they were doing and investigate. Yet the stairs and nearby rooms were empty. Other activity seemed to focus on the equipment used by the venue. Amplifiers and other objects were said to shift or fall when no one was standing beside them. Staff occasionally returned to an area and found equipment in a different position from where they remembered leaving it. In a busy nightclub, objects are moved constantly, and not every misplaced item requires a paranormal explanation. But the incidents became harder to dismiss when they happened after the building had emptied. But not every unsettling event at the Masquerade belonged to the 19th century. During a New Year's Eve event in 2002, part of the stairway leading toward heaven gave way, causing minor injuries. The accident had a real structural explanation, but inside a building already linked with industrial deaths and unexplained activity, it added another incident to the venue's troubled reputation. The Masquerade left the Dupree Mill in 2016 and moved into underground Atlanta. The original mill was later converted for new use, although part of the historic structure collapsed during construction work in 2019 before being repaired. The old club may be gone, but the building itself remains. Today, the stages called Heaven, Purgatory, and Hell no longer occupy those original rooms. Yet during the years when the Masquerade filled the mill with music, staff claimed that other sounds could still be heard beneath it. Footsteps moving across an empty floor, equipment shifting in the darkness, and a woman screaming near a staircase where no one was standing. Grady Memorial Hospital and the streets of Sweet Auburn are still busy parts of modern Atlanta, yet both are linked to reports that seem to come from another time. At Grady, hospital staff claimed they heard a woman screaming outside an operating room, even though the corridor was empty. In Sweet Auburn, people walking after dark have reported shadowy figures moving between doorways before disappearing. Were these brief moments of fear, or signs that the past is still close beneath the modern city? The Grady Hospital account reportedly took place during an eye operation in October 2013. A surgical technician and the doctor were working inside the operating room when they heard a loud female scream from the hallway beyond the closed door. The witness described it as the cry of someone in extreme distress, loud enough to interrupt the procedure and make everyone in the room stop for a moment. A short time later, the scream came again. The doctor asked a nurse to check the corridor, expecting to find a patient, relative, or member of staff in trouble. The nurse stepped outside, searched the nearby area, and returned with a simple answer. There was no one there. The hallway was empty and quiet. Then the scream came a third time. By then, more than one person had heard it clearly. It did not appear to come through a speaker from another treatment room or from farther along the corridor. It sounded close, yet every attempt to find the woman ended with the same empty hallway. After the operation was completed, staff asked whether anyone else had heard the cries. According to the account, another surgical technician became upset and admitted that similar screams had been heard repeatedly over several hours, though no one had been able to locate their source. Hospitals naturally produce confusing sounds. Voices travel through corridors, doors block the direction of noise, and a cry from another floor can sometimes seem much closer than it is. But the people inside that operating room were familiar with the building and the sounds around them. A few miles away, Sweet Auburn carries a different kind of reputation. The district is closely connected with Atlanta's African American history and the civil rights movement. During the day, its streets are filled with landmarks, businesses, visitors, and traffic. After dark, however, some people have reported seeing figures standing near doorways or moving quickly along the pavement. The shapes are usually described as human, but without clear faces or clothing. A witness may notice someone standing ahead of them, only for the figure to disappear when they look again. Others report the feeling of being followed. They hear no footsteps and see no one close behind, yet the sense of another presence remains as they walk. Some describe the street becoming unusually quiet at the same moment, with the temperature seeming to drop around them. The reports are brief. There is no single named ghost, and no one building where the activity always takes place. Instead, the stories describe shapes appearing for only a few seconds before blending back into the darkness. It is possible that streetlights, doorways, and passing traffic create the appearance of movement. In a historic district, an ordinary shadow can quickly take on meaning, especially when someone already knows the area's long and difficult past. Yet that explanation does not fully account for the witnesses who describe the same feeling. A figure appears, watches for a moment, and vanishes as soon as it is noticed. Grady Hospital and Sweet Auburn do not depend on abandoned buildings or locked rooms for their ghost stories. The reports come from places that are still active every day, a working hospital, and streets people continue to walk after dark. A short distance north of Atlanta, the historic town of Roswell has collected ghost stories around its old homes, mill ruins, and quiet streets. At Bullock Hall, visitors claim an empty rocking chair moves across the porch. Near the old mill district, a young girl has reportedly appeared before suddenly rushing towards witnesses. And inside Barrington Hall, one piece of furniture is said to carry a warning that members of the family took seriously. Why have so many of Roswell's stories remained attached to places built by the town's founding families? Bullock Hall was completed in 1839 and became the childhood home of Mittie Bulloch, the mother of President Theodore Roosevelt. Yet the figure most often associated with its paranormal stories is not a famous member of the family. Visitors approaching the house have reported seeing one of the rocking chairs on the front porch moving when no one is sitting nearby. Some claim the movement begins slowly, as though someone has only just settled into it. Others have photographed what appears to be a person seated in one chair, although witnesses present at the time insist the porch was empty. The local Roswell Ghost Tour has received several photographs showing unexplained shapes around the house and its upper windows, though photographs alone cannot establish what was actually there. One tradition connects the activity with a young enslaved girl who reportedly worked inside the house, tending candles and oil lamps. The story says she died after falling into a well on the property, although surviving details about her life and death are uncertain. The Roswell Manufacturing Company once operated mills beside Vickery Creek. During the Civil War, the mills produced cloth and other materials used by the Confederacy. Union forces burned the complex in July 1864, and around 400 workers, mostly women and children, were detained before being transported north. Some eventually returned, while the fate of others remains uncertain. Trails pass through Old Mill Park and alongside the remaining stone walls. Visitors come for the waterfall, the covered bridge, and the ruins, but ghost stories have also formed around the surrounding district. One of the best known involves a young girl dressed in clothing that appears to come from another period. She has reportedly been seen skipping or walking near the former mill worker buildings, sometimes appearing ordinary until witnesses notice that she is alone. In the most repeated version of the encounter, a group of schoolgirls saw the child moving near them. At first, she appeared playful and did not seem threatening. Then she turned, rushed towards the group, and screamed. The girls ran from the area before discovering that no one else had seen a child nearby. Roswell's third major tradition is found at Barrington Hall, the home built for Barrington King, whose family helped establish the town and its mills. Completed in the early 1840s, the house remained connected with the King family for generations. The best-known story inside the house centers on an ordinary wooden chair. According to local tradition, several deaths within the family became associated with this particular piece of furniture. The story grew strong enough that later descendants were said to avoid sitting in it, believing that anyone who treated the warning lightly might become the next victim. Some versions claim family members died shortly after using the chair. Others are far less specific and simply describe it as an object that brought unease to those who knew its history. Visitors have described feeling uncomfortable near it. Some report the sense that someone is already occupying the chair, despite it being visibly empty. Others say they became dizzy or uneasy after standing close to it and felt better only after moving away. Barrington Hall is also linked with footsteps, doors moving, and the impression of people passing through rooms. Because generations of the same family lived there, local guides often connect these experiences with former residents rather than one particular ghost. A figure has occasionally been reported near the windows or crossing the grounds, though the descriptions are rarely clear enough to identify who it might represent. Roswell's old houses and mill ruins remain open to visitors, but according to those who have experienced something there, not everyone connected with the town's earliest years has entirely left. Atlanta rebuilt itself after war, fire, and tragedy, but rebuilding did not erase everything that happened here. From voices among the graves to footsteps in empty corridors and figures appearing inside old buildings, the city's past still seems unusually close. Whether these reports are ghosts, memory, or something harder to explain, haunted Atlanta has never been completely silent.